So welcome to Untitled Wildlife Center. Today I'm going to be taking you through the journey of creating the mural out here in their space. So we'll learn a little bit about what they do here and the crew, along with a time lapse of putting the mural together. So I hope you enjoy it. While we're looking at some of the beautiful wildlife at Untitled Wildlife Center, I'd just like to take a moment to say to bear with me through the beginning of this next clip because it gets very windy and we hadn't worked out those details yet. So this part will get painted over, but I need to make sure I've got everything laid out correctly, the right general shapes and sizes, so I can make sure this composition works and is in proper proportion. All right, I'm gonna do this house painting style now. So since this is a large surface and I'm not really worried about the detail just yet or covering up those lines, I'm rolling this all out. So the two main colors, I'm kind of using my background color right now, which is that lilac for the sky. Then I'll be using the green for the ground. Let's take a minute to meet the lady who got this started. Elise Zader is a teacher at Untitled Wildlife Center, and she started this garden and had the idea for this mural. She's been helping along the way and frequently stops by to check progress and have a chat. The rain is coming in, so it's time to wrap up this short first day. Back at Oatland again, in the garden. So here's a little peek at my work area. Now we're going to backtrack a second. So before I got over there and prepped and met and did all that, Elise had emailed me and we kind of tossed around some ideas. So the next step was to draw those ideas. I went through 2 drafts first, where we had just discussed the idea of doing a mural in general. Then we moved along to let's make it educational and part of the garden. So this mural is supposed to help teach the kids what they're already learning about when they go into the garden. It's about the plant life cycle as well as the water cycle. So it's a combination going on here. Then after drawing this out, getting it approved by everyone that they were happy that this was what would go on the wall, I did a few color sketches. I wasn't really sure what direction to go, so I just threw a few together to see what I liked best. All right, let's take a look at these paints for a second. So what I did was went with house paints. Behr is a pretty decent brand, and I've got 2 gallons, one of yellow, one of white, since those are the lighter colors and usually used for a base. Then my other primaries, blue and red, I have in the small quart size. The other quart is a navy blue that I'm going to use later for outlining and possibly any really dark shading. So I'm pre-mixing some of my colors. Like I'm doing a mix of like my base colors, getting my secondary, green, orange, and later brown, and just, that kind of thing. But I'll also be kind of mixing and blending on the surface. I really wanted to make this a little bit more interesting than just a flat color background or just a flat blue. So I'm kind of just experimenting here and mixing in some other colors, seeing what I can come up with and if it makes sense. So I'm just starting this process now, and then as we go, we'll just kind of reassess things. It helps us stand back and take a look, assess things every so often. And I'll paint my happy little lake over here. Commercial break time. So I'm letting things dry in between, and the great thing about Oatland Island is that while the paint is drying, I can go on a beautiful walk. So right now, while you're walking around out here, you'll meet a lot of the crew. So there are a lot of hands on deck here that help make Oatland Island what it is. Back to work. So I went ahead and slapped on some yellow paint, then I did some blue, and I try to do this quickly before any of it dried. So different paint brushes for each, and then I've gone in with a clean brush from there and blended them together. Just little strokes back and forth so that I'm not really mixing it into the brush, but just sort of slightly mixing it on the surface. So this is before I mixed up the brown paint. I decided I was going to start with my base red and then add in a bit of blue and then some yellow. So, all the primary colors to make brown. But that can still be difficult. So it also, depends what kind of brown do you want? Do you want it more yellow? Do you want it more reddish? How dark do you want it? So here I'm kind of going back and forth and trying to get the color I want. Which was a bit of a challenge. So I did end up mixing it into a bucket later, and that way I kind of knew what I was working with before I put it on there, since I was having trouble. Okay, this has had a bit more time to dry, so I'm back suiting up because it's February, and even though it's Georgia, I'm cold. A few times I had to just leave because I was too cold to work, and it was incredibly windy on most of the days that I was there. I primarily worked on this on the weekends because of my regular work schedule, so I couldn't quite plan for the better weather days. Now, I'm going back and cleaning up the edges on everything that I blurred out before. So we've got clouds, the sun, and what looks like the second sun at this point. And actually a family did stop by and ask me about that. Why do you have two suns? Which I said, well, maybe we're on another planet, in another galaxy. But yes, this will be the flower. normally if I were doing watercolor or a smaller scale painting, I would go in and do all these little blades of grass. So I started trying that here, but it really didn't work with the texture I already had. It just seemed to kind of cover that up. So I sort of nixed that idea and moved on. This must have been right after talking with the family. I started to make the flower look like a flower. And what we haven't seen yet are the stages. So now we have a couple stages of the flower growing from the ground into a bud, and we will go back to that later. All right, so here's another thing that I wanted to assess, which is also why it's nice if you are able to kind of step back, look at it, take a day, take a week, and come back to it. So I love that purple color in the background, but two things, it seemed a little too subdued, like maybe almost sad, and I really didn't want that. And also another thing, even though this isn't a realistic style kind of painting, the sun being that high in the sky with barely any clouds doesn't make sense for the sky to be those colors. So I'm going back to what I probably should have done in the first place and do more of a true blue sort of sky. Though I will make it a bit more interesting than that. So now I've come back to this again. I'm here another day. And now that that's all dry up top, it's still, I didn't really want that solid color. So I'm going back and I'm adding all these different shades of blue. Same way that I did the grass, where I've got a brush for each different tint or shade of blue. And then once that's on there, and again quickly so it doesn't dry, I've gone back in with another, just a clean brush, and I'm kind of just lightly smearing these around. I've gone back to the water. I've decided to go ahead and make that a little bit darker because I want more of a contrast. So it still balances out with the sky, blue and blue, but now it's darker so it stands out a little bit more against the grass. It's time for another walk through Oatland while we let some more things dry. So we're about to get to all the details, but it's good to take a break, refresh, clear your mind for a minute, and then get back to it. Then I'm going back to the grass again to address the fact that I want that flower to look much more in the foreground, because that's the only way the flower being that size really makes sense anyway. So I'm trying to make that hill that it's on stand out a little bit differently from the hill in the background. So I'm trying to do that with some atmospheric perspective by making the hill in the background lighter and making the hill in the foreground darker and more defined texture. Now the sun needs some adjusting. Now that I've gone back and touched up the sky yet again, I need to go back to the sun, and I want to add some shading in there too. So I've added some orange. Also with the clouds, I want to give a little bit of that reflective color on there. So we've got a little bit of sunshine on the cloud. I'm trying not to overdo it. I struggle with that because I really would like to keep this simple, especially since this is for kids. I think that can be a good thing, but part of me just wants to go in there and shade everything. So I tend to go back and forth on that kind of thing. I have to catch myself. I'm starting to get closer to the part of painting that I really love, which is the details. So I do like the peacefulness of just blocking out colors, and blending things can be a really kind of great meditative thing, but I love doing the details. So now I'm working on the flower. I'm adding the highlights and the shading and going into the different stages of the flower and trying to get that in there as well. Also, since I've altered the grass, I've got to go back and kind of repaint the stems and the leaves and all that. So there are a few parts of this painting that I do like multiple times as I'm kind of figuring certain things out as I go. Another important part of the plant life cycle to highlight is what happens underneath the soil, the part that we don't see, what's happening down there. So the kids need to know that too, right? So I'm painting in some of the details here, at least sort of mapping that out. I've got my, what looks like beans, I've got my seeds, and then I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, I put some of these things sort of close together. How am I going to show all these roots and still make it look different? So I'm trying to kind of figure that out and have all this look cohesive. Woo, time to outline. So I've got a dark navy instead of black. That way, if I go to blend any of it, which I did end up using in certain spots, it looks a lot nicer. You don't get as much of that green that you kind of get when you mix black. Definitely go with a dark blue, and of course like red too, if you're going for a natural looking shading. Now that I've defined that hill in the foreground, I really need to fix my lake because it doesn't really make sense. So I've pulled that over, and now you get the idea that it is in between this hill in the foreground and the hill in the background. Of course, something else that makes sense, I'm sure you've noticed, but I'll go ahead and note anyway, is that I've switched to my tiny brushes. So instead of using the, standard house painting brushes, I switched to my normal like acrylic paint brushes so I can get all these small details in. Also, I'm going back around the flower now and just trying to fill in anywhere that doesn't look quite right. So getting that all touched up now. I am now just labeling everything. So the kids need to know all the different parts, even stuff that kind of we forget that we already know. So going in and doing the lettering, which is something I also really enjoy doing, hand lettering. I'm back playing in the dirt. I was almost happy with the way this looked, but because I want my background kind of elements standing out from the focal points like the flower, the sun, the seeds, I decided I needed to go back and give the soil some texture, so that kind of went along with that whole portion of the mural. However, that does mean I've got to repaint some things. Along with all the labels for everything, I also found it helpful to add some arrows, mostly because I've got these two different things going on here. So I've got the plant life cycle and the water cycle, and they do correlate, but I still needed to differentiate. So I've got the orange arrows to show the plant life cycle, the red to show the water cycle, because those are two colors that aren't really used in the mural yet, so I figured those would kind of stand out better than me trying to use any of the other colors that are already going on in there. Yay, Mr. Sun is back! I kept singing Raffi's Mr. Golden Sun to myself while I was painting this, which I ended up naming the mural after. So I'm going back and I am cleaning up these spots. The day that I added the faces, all of my videos from that day are garbage. The phone died and I never got it working again, so that footage has disappeared. But you can see some happy little faces on there and some surprise faces. So while I was working on this, I had to go back and research some things, do some internet referencing, and sometimes I'd paint certain things and realize, well, that doesn't quite make sense. Again, with the two different cycles going on, I had that kind of happen to me a few times. So you'll see me create some arrows, paint over them, write some things, maybe paint over that, and that is the explanation for why that happened. This is the awesome hydroponics system that Elise Zader created, and it's really flourishing. The garden is doing really well. The mural is now complete. So I worked on this for over the course of about a month and a half. Total time would probably be more like 5 days or like 25 hours. It's been pretty awesome to see how the kids have taken to it. Elise tells me it's been a great learning tool. She's been able to use it quite a bit. And I did get to enjoy some of that too while I was painting. So families came through and they'd comment on it, and the kids got what it was right away, even before I had done the labels and that kind of thing. So come back and join me again soon. Oh, we're leaving already? Well, hold on a sec, because we're going to stop and say hi to Shay, who came out and helped me on my first day of filming. Say hello to Shay, the video director and editor in all her glory. Thanks, Shay.
Hold it down.
And one last shout out to the W Projects and Revival Society crew and all that were involved in the Pavement to Parks project that we did 3 years ago, where we built all of these benches at Oatland Island Wildlife Center. They were able to reuse them, and the kids even added their special touch to it. Pretty awesome to see.